lay down or be shot down. That's what John Horton Slaughter used to say. Once described as the meanest good guy who ever lived, John Horton Slaughter lived up to the name. He was said to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner, all rolled into one. Admired by Wild Bill Hickock, Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and Pat Garrett, among numerous others. It is said of Slaughter he would head in any direction across that 6,000 square mile desert. He cleaned up the mess that Wyatt Earp and his brothers had left in Tombstone. Slaughter was brave, honest, and straightforward. The 5 6 inch Slaughter commanded respect wherever he went. He was an American lawman, cowboy, poker player, and rancher.
Born in 1841 in Sabine Parish near Mani in western Louisiana. From Mexican vaqueros who worked for his father, John Slaughter learned how to herd cattle and how to speak Spanish.
Starting from the early 1860s, Slaughter defended European settlers against hostile Comanche as a Texas Ranger. He also fought in the Civil War. After that, he became a cattleman who operated driving herds around Kansas, Mexico, Texas, and California. He became one of the first people to drive cattle up the Chisholm Trail. Slaughter was unique in how he acquired some of his cattle. He may have been putting his brand on someone else's cows. John had married Eliza Adeline Harris in 1871 and began to raise a family. They had 4 children, 2 of whom lived to adulthood. Towards the latter half of the 1870s, Slaughter had decided to settle near Tucson. He had been temporarily living near Roswell on the Pecos River. He was about to establish his ranch in Arizona. His wife and children arrived to join him. Eliza, his first wife, had contracted smallpox and died. At the age of 37, John had met Cora Viola Howell, who was only 19. They relocated to the Tombstone area. He enjoyed gambling and famously bet John Chisholm in a poker game. In 1876, in San Antonio, Texas, Slaughter noticed in a poker game a Barney Gallagher playing with marked cards. Slaughter pulled out his pistol, took the pot himself, reversed out the door, and rode off. Gallagher wasn't happy and followed Slaughter to South Springs. "You tell that midget son of a bitch I'm here to kill him." Gallagher waited with his rifle and saw Slaughter appear on the horizon. As he raised his rifle, it was Gallagher who fell, as Slaughter got him first. He was placed on Governor Lew Wallace's most wanted list for the killing. He was arrested and deprived of 500 of his cattle before being released. He then moved to Cochise County and discouraged cattle thieves on both sides of the Mexican border. He became sheriff in Cochise County, Arizona, in 1886, where Tombstone is located. only 5 years after the gunfight at the OK Corral. He was also re-elected for a second term there. Slaughter's no-nonsense attitude in Cochise County was, get out or get shot.
During his 2 terms as sheriff, he arrested dozens of livestock thieves and booked them into what he called Hotel de Slaughter, the Cochise County Jail.
Slaughter served 2 terms as sheriff and as deputy sheriff until his death. Slaughter wore a pearl-handled .44 and had a double-barrel 10-gauge sawed-off shotgun, which he called an equalizer. He had helped to rid the area of Apache Indian fighters. Slaughter was sometimes nicknamed Texas John. He knew the Clantons, the Earps, Johnny Ringo, Pancho Villa, and many others. He had also, along with Jeff Milton and his deputies, helped to track the Jack Taylor gang, who were notoriously vicious train robbers, whom had previously shot a number of train passengers during one of their robberies. Milton recounts, because they had kinfolk around Tombstone, the Jack Taylor gang had no more sense than to hide there, right under the nose of the law, which unfortunately for them was John Slaughter. Slaughter had heard that the bandits were holed up at the home of a Mexican woman named Flora Cardenas. Somebody had tipped off the bandits, and Cardenas denied everything. The outlaws were tracked to Clifton and then to Wilcox. Slaughter learned that Manuel Robles' brother, Guadalupe Robles, had a firewood business in Contention. Most of the gang were tracked to Contention City, Arizona. Slaughter and his men stormed the house. To your feet, Slaughter ordered. Get up with your hands high. 2 outlaws from the gang and Guadalupe came out shooting. Guadalupe Robles was shot dead by Slaughter, while Neves Deron opened fire on Slaughter and his posse, with 1 bullet grazing Slaughter's earlobe. The 2 gang members fled towards the rocks near the house, exchanging fire with the posse as they ran. Slaughter and 2 of his deputies shot and killed Deron, and shot and wounded Manuel Robles, who, though wounded, escaped into a thicket. The Taylor gang was finished. Slaughter's no-nonsense attitude in Cochise County was, get out or get shot. Many took his advice. Months later, the remnants of the gang, in an ambush intended to kill Slaughter, mistook Deputy Sheriff Cesario Lucero for Slaughter and killed him. John and Viola had opened and ran a butcher shop in Charleston. He purchased 2,366 acres of a portion of an old San Bernadino land grant north of the United States-Mexican border near Douglas. They acquired the San Bernadino Ranch in 1884. It was an Apache settlement until John had purchased the land from the Perez family. The Apache had originally ran off the Perez family. John had allowed the Apache to slaughter some of his steer for food.
But then the Apache bands began to raid his cattle. Slaughter went into their lair. Subsequently, they avoided his ranges. Slaughter assisted the army as a scout under General Crook in tracking down Geronimo. Geronimo surrendered in September 1886 on Slaughter's range. John's daughter, Addie, was at the Bowie station where Geronimo was placed on a train on his way out of Arizona. Addie recalls there was a big noisy crowd at the station because, of course, everyone wanted to see the famous Geronimo. There he stood, head held high, as proud as ever, looking at all the people who had come to see him. He motioned with his hand for me to come over. I couldn't move at first. After a second or two, I walked over. He looked me right in the eye, took off one of his bead necklaces, and very slowly held it out to me until I took it. He then did the most surprising thing of all. He bowed to me. All I could think of was that he was bowing to the daughter of John Slaughter.
He escorted Geronimo, the Apache chief, along with General Lawton, when Geronimo was rounded up and compelled to surrender. Geronimo had famously said, many years later, if he could do one thing, it would be to go back to Arizona and kill John Slaughter.
Slaughter, when he heard this, took it as a compliment.
John Horton Slaughter had hired a Bert Alvord as his chief deputy. He was a sidekick of a sometimes lawman, Billy Hildreth. Augustine Chacon was a Mexican outlaw. He was considered extremely dangerous, and it was said that he killed about 30 people. He had led a gang which operated mainly as horse thieves and cattle rustlers. They routinely crossed into Arizona to commit crimes. Multiple murders, rapes, robberies, and other crimes were attributed to the gang, but they always evaded capture. Lawmen such as John Horton Slaughter became involved in the pursuit. Chacon was at Tombstone bragging that he would kill Slaughter on sight. Sheriff Slaughter investigated and was told by an informant where Chacon was held up. Slaughter and his deputy, Bert Alvord, surrounded the tent that Chacon was sleeping in. They called on him to surrender. The bandit had jumped up and ran out the back entrance. Slaughter had fired with a shotgun and assumed he hit Chacon as he had tumbled into a nearby ditch, but the lawmen found no body. They decided Chacon must have tripped on a rope at the foot of the tent, and the shotgun blast had passed over his head. Bob Alvord was a choice for deputy sheriff that was often criticised by journalists. He was the muscle in a number of Slaughter's operations. He was accused of having a lack of experience and finesse in law enforcement. His reputation suffered as his alcoholism became greater. He had begun to frequent saloons and to associate with gamblers and outlaws. Slaughter challenged him about this and he quit. Years later, Alvord would assist Arizona Rangers such as Captain Burton C. Mossman in capturing Augustine Chacon in 1902. He did so in exchange for reward money and for a reduced sentence. Bert Alvord was recruited to act as a stool pigeon to lure Augustine Chacon. Bert Alvord had betrayed his friend Augustine Chacon to Captain Burton Mossman of the Arizona Rangers, and Chacon was caught and hanged. Alvord then turned to train and bank robbery.
The San Bernadino Ranch of Slaughter's was blessed with plenty of water. Soon it was one of Arizona's greatest ranches, running cattle on 250,000 acres. He then felt he had done enough and wanted to get back to the family and ranch. His successor, famous photographer C.S. Fly, appointed him deputy, a position of honour Slaughter held until his death. In 1898, a known thief, Pegleg Finney, made the mistake of showing up at Slaughter's ranch. Slaughter was warned by telephone. Pegleg came onto the San Bernadino Ranch and was taking a nap under one of the trees. He awoke to find Slaughter and some others staring down at him. He grabbed his pistol, but got a bullet from Slaughter's Winchester.
1899. Little Bob Stevens, a gambler, had held up a roulette game in Tombstone. Slaughter caught up with him and killed him. In 1901, Slaughter joined a posse to track an outlaw who had murdered a young woman, as well as her son and daughter, for $300. Slaughter finally caught up to the man. One interesting thing that is said is that he resisted arrest. There were countless bullet holes found upon him. The famous Pancho Villa had nicknamed John Slaughter the Wicked Little Gringo. John was furious that Pancho Villa's army were stealing cattle and vegetables from the San Bernadino Ranch. Slaughter, who was in his 70s, had rode alone into Villa's camp and demanded money. When Slaughter returned, his saddlebag was heavy with gold. It is said that Sheriff Slaughter killed at least a dozen men who had it coming. He had adopted a number of children with his second wife, including an abandoned Apache child they named Apache Slaughter, who tragically died at the age of 5 in an accident. As the years went on, Slaughter became more feeble. He had eczema on his hands and on his feet, as well as suffering from high blood pressure.
Slaughter's last gunfight was on May 4th, 1921, when he and Viola drove off a band of bandits with shotguns. Slaughter looked up from his evening paper and suddenly reached for his Colt. Yet again, the old man was ready to fight. His fearlessness was partly due to his belief that a guardian angel watched over him. He often said, "No man can kill me. I wasn't born to be killed. I cannot explain it, but I know it. When my time comes, I'll die in bed."
On May 4th, 1921, a foreman, Jesse Fisher, was murdered at the San Bernardino Ranch by robbers. Slaughter had believed he was in danger, so he asked Fisher to check on the horses. Slaughter moved into a bedroom without windows. It was only seconds later that Fisher was murdered.
The 4 assailants abandoned their plan to kill everybody at the ranch house. Slaughter had not appeared. They feared that terrible little man who had death in his stern black eyes. It took men and women with bark to survive on the Arizona frontier.
One of the killers was said to be one of Slaughter's adopted children, a fact which left the couple distraught. Convinced that they needed to leave the ranch, the Slaughters moved to Douglas. He died at his home in the Fisher Apartments on 12th Street, Douglas, Arizona, following an acute attack of high blood pressure. The Copper Era newspaper gave the following tribute to John Horton Slaughter, published 2 days after his death. As a type of the true Westerner, John Slaughter was perhaps the most outstanding of any of the pioneers of Arizona, one who had battled both with outlaws and Indians on the redemption of Arizona from the dangers of the hostile Apache, and for protection of the early settlers from outlawry and depredation. John Horton Slaughter died on February the 15th, 1922, nearly 100 years ago. He only finally laid down at the age of 80. Texas John Horton Slaughter is credited with cleaning up Arizona territory more than any other lawman.